Phil, thank you very much, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Very dangerous to suggest a professor should give only a short talk, but let's see what we can do. I'm sure everyone in this room does not need me to say who this is. Greta Thunberg, 16-year-old Swedish schoolgirl who has been every Friday on strike from school since last August to urge her government in Sweden and governments around the world to take more action on climate change. I think the example that she has created, already having the opportunity to talk in front of the European Parliament, in front of the World Economic Forum in Davos, in front of the last Global Climate Change Conference of the United Nations and so on, is an incredibly powerful example for us all. But ladies and gentlemen, for our purposes this morning, Greta Thunberg and all of the other people, the 15-year-old girl from Glasgow who interrogated all the Tory would-be prime ministers on television, on BBC, on Tuesday night, and so on. All of those people are very soon going to be your employees, your customers, your investors, and actually, potentially, your critics and regulators. So I really want to pick up this morning where Dan Lyons left off. Because the reality that CEOs and C-suites around the world are confronted with a whole range of what the American military first called a VUCA world. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Climate change and dramatic climate extreme conditions are just one of a whole range of challenges that perhaps a few years ago people might say were the soft issues. Soft no longer. They are hard for business, hard to manage, hard to ignore, and very hard for the businesses that get them wrong. The Greta Thunbergs of this world are now expecting that businesses will take much greater responsibility for their social and their environmental and their economic impacts. Negative, but also positive. And I had the opportunity with two Canadian colleagues to study 20 years of who do global experts across the world, in big businesses, in NGOs, in the media, in academia, who do experts in sustainability in those different sectors regard as being the leading companies across the world when it comes to sustainability, managing both the negative social and environmental and economic impacts that any business has, but also finding the business opportunity and creating value that way. Some of the logos up there may surprise you, because since they were ranked by those global experts sometime between 1997 and 2017, one or two of them have fallen from grace. One or two of them no longer exist. But we looked at those companies. We interviewed the people running those businesses at the time that they were regarded as being global leaders. And from that, we came to the conclusion that 20 years ago, when we were talking about what responsibilities is a business taking in wider society, at best, it was what we might call a do no harm era. How do we at least try and minimize some of the negative impacts that we have? And then we moved to what might be called a strategic integration era, when leading companies across the world recognized that if they really wanted to be apart from the pack, then they had to make this much more coherent with their overall business strategy. And most recently, we believe that we're now in an era that you might call the purpose era. Think back to Dan's closing remarks about those different companies that he was highlighting. Those are businesses, I would suspect, with a very clear sense of their purpose. And my argument, ladies and gentlemen, this morning, before we get into the detail of all of the latest techniques around mental health first aid and around the latest in terms of different techniques for having a balance of different benefits and compensation, before we look at the latest offers around Fitbit and so on, important though those, of course, all are, it is very critical for us to understand the bigger picture in which employees will truly feel a sense of well-being at work or not. Can they be 100% human at work? And my argument is that those businesses, those organizations that are really now going to become the most successful in terms of truly having long-term employee well-being will be those that are also going all in terms of leading for sustainability. These are not two separate pillars, two separate sets of ideas. The really successful leaders in employee well-being will be those that take this wider holistic approach. 5 key attributes for an all-in business: purpose, plan, culture, collaboration, and advocacy. If we start with having a sense of a wider purpose, Dan was quite right. The old idea that the purpose of business is about maximizing shareholder value is an anachronistic one. Not because profit is unimportant. Profit, of course, for for-profit business is fundamental, but it's hardly the purpose. It should be the consequence of a well-run business. And I think it's fascinating to see now how a number of companies have started to think much more deeply. Why are we here? How do we create value for society as well as for our shareholders and our other stakeholders? Is that purpose authentic? Is it inspiring? Take a look, for example, at the very clever way that Unilever took their original purpose from the 1880s about making cleanliness commonplace and turning it into a 21st century version about making sustainable living commonplace. Look in the way that IKEA talks about creating a better everyday life for the many people. The second critical attribute of a business that really goes all in after purpose is about having a comprehensive plan, if you like, a strategy. Think again of the way in which Unilever, with their Sustainable Living Plan, which they launched back in 2010, has been a kind of North Star which has covered not just the totality of the business itself, but increasingly also their suppliers, and starting now to engage also with the other part of their value chain, their employees as well. Think of the way in which Walmart, by no means perfect, as many of these other companies are not either, but look at the way in which they have taken a very leadership position in terms of their commitments around climate change as a leading part of their sustainability strategy. And the crucial thing, as Alan Jope, the new leader in Unilever, is making clear, is the way in which this plan for sustainability is the plan or the strategy of the business. That takes time. It doesn't happen automatically. But that is the aspiration, I believe, that we need to work for. And the third critical attribute is about culture. I hardly need to say anything to a conference of this nature about the critical importance of having a positive culture if you really want to achieve your purpose and your strategy. We think, and I was fascinated that Dan was talking also about the importance and the contribution and the example of Patagonia. They were one of the businesses that we looked at in some detail. And the way in which Yvonne Chouinard talks in that book about Let My People Go Surfing, about how from the very beginnings in the 1970s, they made sure that everyone joining Patagonia understood and had an opportunity to really be inducted in the values of the organization and what Patagonia wanted each of their employees to do and how they wanted all of their employees to behave. We think there are 4 critical dimensions of what really counts as a sustainable culture. It is about having a culture, as Hannah Jones from Nike and other of the companies that we looked at talked about, where the strategy for innovation is sustainability, where innovation is sustainability, where the complete symbiosis of innovation and sustainability is achieved. Just look at what they're doing, for example, with things like their fly leather technology. A second critical aspect, second dimension of being a really sustainable culture is where an organization truly is able to engage and empower its employees. Think of that brilliant book, by Daniel Pink, about drive, mastery, autonomy, but crucially also having a sense of purpose. So engagement in employees starts from the top, requires strategic leadership, as I'm looking forward to discussing with Nigel in a few moments, but also creates the opportunities where individuals across the organization can contribute their ideas. I'm fascinated by the growth of the movement around intrapreneurism, encouraging employees to bring forward their own ideas for new products, new services, new ways of doing businesses, and to champion those ideas. But the other dimensions of a sustainable culture are where the organization is truly being open and transparent, not just in terms of sharing a lot more information about itself, about making public its performance, sharing information about its ownership structures and the like, but where it is also open to ideas and suggestions from wherever they may come, is humble enough to recognize in a VUCA world that even the largest global businesses do not have all of the answers themselves. Take a look on the Unilever website and look at the way in which they are regularly advertising the areas where they are struggling, where they're looking for new technology, where they're looking for proposals from startups, from small businesses and the like, who believe that they have technologies, have innovations that will help the business to achieve its sustainable living plan. And of course, a really sustainable culture is one that emphasizes its responsibilities and is ethical. I don't think we interviewed a single global business leader, whether it's Jeff Immelt or Paul Polman or emerging entrepreneurs in China and India, who did not voluntarily, without us prompting, talk about how on their own, even a global company could barely move the dial, whereas if they really wanted to bring about change, they had to be able to work in a whole range of different collaborations and partnerships. It's about having both a mindset and a skill set around collaboration. This is not meant to be an exhaustive description, but on the left of the chart, it shows you some of the partnerships that Unilever had in 2000. By comparison, on the right-hand side, a range of the collaborations by 2017. Not just that there were more, but far more importantly, the depth and the quality of many of those collaborations. And the fifth of our interlinking critical attributes for a business that really wants to go all in is around what we call advocacy. Businesses and CEOs and boards being prepared to speak out and to speak up for social justice and for sustainable development. Look at the way, for example, that a group of American companies, even after President Trump withdrew the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement, said, we are still in, and a part of the We Are Still In movement. In the past, a business could, and indeed was, ranked as a global leader because it was achieving one or two of those attributes. We believe that today, the crucial thing is the way in which they interact. One of the best examples, the only business that has been in the GlobeScan Sustainability Leaders Survey, which is the basis of our book and of our research, over 22 years now, is the American floor covering business called Interface, started by the late great Ray Anderson in the Southern American state of Georgia back in the 1970s. They've been on a mission for sustainability since 1994. Their latest manifestation is a fascinating example of business advocacy, their climate take-back program. Well worth a look to see what they're doing. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I think all of this is so fundamentally important for those of you who are trying to tackle the scourge of mental ill health in your workplace or in wider society, for those of you who are trying to encourage a greater sense of work-life integration, for those of you who are concerned with what does a fair pension in the 2020s and beyond look like. But as some business leaders were saying to me earlier in the week when I was meeting with a group of businesses, mainly in the high-tech and financial services sectors in Tel Aviv, they argued that meaning is now the new money. And what they meant by that was that the modern employee rightly expects decent pay and conditions as a basis, as getting into the game. The real long-term differentiator will be those businesses that can really show something deeper and wider. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.